Hey there, I'm Carrie, and welcome back to my 4-part series on the fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe. This is part 2. In this video, we're going to do some analysis. We're going to talk about the setting and the major characters. If you were looking for the summary, that is part 1 of this series, and I will link that in the video notes below. I've also got timestamps for this video in the notes below, so definitely scroll down, click around, and find exactly what it is you need. All right, without further ado, let's get back into the fall of the House of Usher. There is a lot here. There's a lot packed into this story, so let's just begin at the beginning. This is Gothic fiction. Edgar Allan Poe is a very influential voice in the Gothic genre. The first thing that you need to know about it is that it has a very strong medieval influence. You'll see lots of castles and kings and queens and knights and ladies in the Gothic genre. It tends to be very morbid, it's dark, and it's melodramatic. It's very over the top. And frequently in Gothic fiction, you have a supernatural element, something like a ghost or a witch or a spirit. One of Gothic's most popular subgenres is vampire fiction. Dracula is a classic Gothic novel. Now, I mention that because I think there is a lot of vampire imagery in the fall of the House of Usher that's very prominent in there, and I will point that out as we go along. All right, so let's get into the text. Go to the beginning of the story. We have an unnamed narrator, which is pretty common in short stories by Poe. You see that quite a lot. The story takes place in the autumn. If you've read The Bells, which is a poem by Edgar Allan Poe, you might have noticed that autumn for him seems to have an association with death. It's this darker time of the year, and it is moving into winter when everything sort of goes into this long sleep. So if you are interested in that, check out The Bells for sure. Now, the narrator has been summoned by his childhood friend, Roderick Usher. Even though he hasn't seen Usher in a really long time, and he even admits that they don't know each other that well, he feels like he has to answer this summons. He has to answer this call. He says, "I obeyed forthwith," when he gets the message from Usher. This is the first thing that bothers me. Why couldn't he say no? Why does he need to put his whole life on pause? He needs to leave his home, his family, his job, whatever he's got going on, and go see this guy that he hasn't seen in a really long time. So I think this is the first suggestion of a vampire, the first vampire image that we have in here. A very common trope in vampire fiction is the trance, where the vampire can put a hold on someone, kind of put them under a spell and command them. And I see sort of a suggestion of that with the narrator. He feels like he can't say no to this. He has to be there. He says, "I obeyed forthwith," when he gets this message from Usher. That doesn't sound like he's rushing there out of concern. It sounds like he doesn't have a choice. I obeyed. And once he gets there, why does he keep staying? He realizes, he says that he isn't really helping. Usher really isn't getting any better, but he stays and stays. He doesn't feel like he can walk away from this situation. Also, the narrator himself is getting worse. As the story goes on, he starts to pick up some of Usher's symptoms, this nervousness, these depressive symptoms. So even though he's not helping Usher, he's making himself worse, he still doesn't leave. The first character that the narrator actually encounters is the house itself. The house is very much a living, active presence in the story. He explains that the community surrounding the mansion really doesn't differentiate, the house from the family. All of it is the House of Usher. And seeing the house causes the same flood of emotions in the narrator that meeting each of the siblings does. He gets this rush of dread and sorrow and fear that comes upon him and infects him when he sees the house. So the house, even though it's overall in good shape, has this aura of decay and rot around it. Let's look at what the text says. A wild inconsistency between its still perfect adaptation of parts and the crumbling condition of the individual stone. For something that is obviously so old, the house is too perfect. It should need some kind of repair at this point, but it doesn't really seem to. However, the small parts, the stones seem to be crumbling and everything is covered with fungi. The house may be a vampiric presence as well. The trees, the lake, the landscaping, everything around this house is dead and rotting, but the house is still standing. It has an unnaturally long life. So that's the image of the vampire, the parasite again. This house is sucking the life out of the land, out of the lake, even out of the air. It has this gloomy atmosphere around it, and the house seems to be building itself up, even though everything around it is dying. The narrator says it has vacant eye-like windows. He uses this expression twice. Now, vacant eyes, that's an expression usually used in reference to a dead body, in reference to a corpse, something that its eyes are open, but it's not seeing anything. It gives the house an even stronger association with death. The tarn, this little lake at the foot of the house, doesn't seem to have any life in it either. There's no mention of fish, no mention of birds. There's not even a mention of movement, ripples or waves or anything like that. It just seems like it's this stagnant body of water there at the foot of the house. Later on, the narrator even refers to the lake as having a rank miasma. Rank means something that smells, it's nasty, and a miasma is like a infectious, vaporous cloud. So there's nothing good coming from this body of water. The narrator thinks it's infectious, it's disgusting, it's rotting. There's also this crack, this zigzag crack down the front of the house. Now, from a builder's perspective, if you have cracks on the exterior wall of your house, that is a textbook sign of foundation problems. If something does not have a solid foundations, it means it's not as sturdy as it should be. It is not stable. So we know something is wrong with this house, and by extension, something is wrong with the family because it isn't stable. I think you can look at that crack metaphorically as well. The splits down the center of the house could indicate the conflict between brother and sister, between Roderick and Madeline. The fact that it's a zigzag could tell us that this is not going to be a clean split. This is going to be a messy break between the two of them. Also, just in literature and also in film, a zigzag image is frequently used to convey a feeling of instability and insecurity. It's jarring to the eye. It reminds us of, shattered glass or a crack in the eye, something that is unstable and unpredictable and dangerous. So this zigzag crack down the house is a signal to us that something is wrong here. Let's talk about this atmosphere, this weird aura that surrounds the house. The narrator describes it as a pestilent and mystic vapor, dull, sluggish, faintly discernible, and leaden-hued. So pestilent means something that is infectious. You will hear pestilence used interchangeably with the word like plague or epidemic. It means a sickness. So he's saying that this vapor, this weird atmosphere around the house is something nasty. It's something that could make you sick. Also, he says the atmosphere around the house is dull and sluggish. So when he enters the house and he encounters the Usher siblings, he finds out that both of them have depression-like symptoms. Madeline is apathetic. She's not very responsive. Usher cannot be pulled out of his sorrow. He's just very, very focused on his sadness and fear. And then we find out that the house is dull and sluggish. So the house is reflecting these depressive symptoms of the people inside it. To revisit that term miasma, the narrator refers to the rank miasma of the lake later on in the story. So a miasma was a smelly, vaporous cloud, but it was also thought to cause disease. Bad smells were thought to cause illness. Germ theory was just in its infancy when Poe was alive. So miasma is a word that his audience really would have clued into, that this is something bad, this is infectious, this is contagious. Okay, let's move on to the other characters, the human members, I should say, of the Usher family. First, we have Roderick Usher. He is the one who summoned the narrator to the house to help him out with this unspecified, unnamed illness. The symptoms that Usher describes are excessive nervous agitation. He's very, very anxious. And morbid acuteness of the senses. That's that sensitivity to light and smell and texture that Usher is experiencing. As the story goes on, he becomes less willing to listen to the narrator. He's less cooperative as time goes on. This anxiety is getting worse and worse. Now, he believes that his house is making him sick. You could ask the question, is it possible for a house to actually make you sick? Perhaps. We'll talk about that here in a minute, but that's not what he means. He believes that the stones, the objects, even the fungi that is growing on the house, that these are sentient, meaning they're alive, they are thinking, they are feeling, they have wills of their own, and that is what is freaking him out. He thinks his life is tied up in the life of the house. So as the house ages and deteriorates, he himself deteriorates. He's getting weaker and weaker. So whether or not this is true, whether or not there is some kind of supernatural connection between Usher and the house, and whether or not there actually is something in the house that could be making him sick, it's freaking him out. The house is a source of severe anxiety for him, and that is making him weak. He can't eat, he can't sleep, he can't engage. He is getting sick because of the house. There are also some vampire elements surrounding Roderick Usher. When the narrator sees him, he says he has a cadaverousness of complexion. A cadaver is a corpse, it's a dead body. So he says Usher is so pale, he looks dead. There's also a weird perfection in Usher's physical features. That's another common vampire trope, this strange beauty that vampires seem to have. He is classically good looking, but it's not pleasing to the eye. He's not nice to look at. Look at what the narrator says. He's looking at Usher's face and he says, "I could not, even with effort, connect its arabesque expression with any idea of simple humanity." Usher doesn't look human. He doesn't look natural. Something is off. Then we meet Madeline Usher. Now we don't get any dialogue from here. We get very little physical description other than the fact that she is seriously ill, and she has been ill for a long time. Now her symptoms include apathy, which is losing interest in the things around you, becoming unresponsive and very disengaged, and a gradual wasting away of the person. So she's been losing weight and gradually getting weaker and weaker. She also has these cataleptic episodes. So a cataleptic episode could be likened to a seizure. It's where the person might go rigid, they lose control of their body, and they become unresponsive. Now it is associated with epilepsy, which is a neurological disorder that does cause seizures. And catalepsy can be caused by an epileptic seizure. It can cause a person to become unresponsive. Now, if Madeline has epilepsy, that might explain why during the middle of the story, her brother thinks she has passed away, because following a very severe seizure, an epileptic person can slip into a coma. So if that happened to Madeline, that might explain why the narrator and why Usher think that she has died. Of course, Madeline also has some vampire elements around her. She is undead, literally. She is in her coffin, but she is still very much alive. Madeline also might be unnaturally strong, another hallmark of vampire fiction, because even though she's been sick for a long time, she manages to bust out of a sealed coffin and lift this iron door where she has been vaulted in, where she has been entombed. I do think, though, that Madeline's symptoms, her illness, say more about her brother Usher than it does about her. I think it gives an even stronger suggestion that Usher is the vampiric presence, that he is the parasitic influence in this relationship. When Usher is telling the narrator about Madeline's sickness, there's something strange in the way that he describes it. Usher tells the narrator that Madeline has been fighting her disease. She has been doing her best to be strong, but she has succumbed to it just as the narrator arrives. She takes a turn for the worst just as he gets to the house. It almost sounds like Usher has summoned a new victim here. You know, he's taken everything that he can from Madeline. She has nothing left, and so he's brought in a new victim, the narrator, that he can prey on. Okay, I will put the vampire talk aside for a while now because there are some much more realistic reasons that the Usher siblings could be sick. I talked earlier about how, maybe Roderick Usher is right. Maybe his house really is making him sick. It's possible. It's this older house, lots of cracks in it. There's no sunlight coming in, and it is on the banks of this stagnant, nasty body of water. So, black mold, anyone? It is not unrealistic that would happen in this kind of situation, and prolonged mold exposure can make a person sick. Another theory that's probably a little bit more solid is lead poisoning. It's this old house that is full of antiques. Everything in there is very old. And antiques, particularly antique dishware, antique cookware, is a source of lead, and lead poisoning was well documented in Poe's day and age. In fact, and I will drop this article in the video notes if you want to look into this theory more, over 100 years before this was written, an Italian physician who was documenting lead poisoning described people that were suffering from it as having a cadaverous appearance and having a leaden complexion. This is very, very similar language to what Poe uses to describe Usher and to describe this atmosphere around the house. Also, lead poisoning can have a wide variety of symptoms, including anemia, which causes very pale skin, mood disorders, including depression, anxiety, hyperactivity, distractedness. It can also cause fatigue, and it has been known to cause seizures. And that would also explain why over time, the longer he stays in this house, the weaker the narrator becomes. So there is a possibility that something is making the Usher family physically ill. And that's why when the narrator joins them in the house, he begins to get sick as well. There is something else that could be causing these mysterious symptoms. Twice in the text, the narrator refers to opium. When he first glimpses the house, he says it gives him the feeling of the after dream of the reveler upon opium. He says Usher's voice is like that of an irreclaimable eater of opium. Now, opium was very widely used in Edgar Allan Poe's era, and it was prescribed for just about everything, all ages, all different kinds of afflictions, including symptoms of depression, things like insomnia, headaches, nerves, things that the Usher siblings are both experiencing. This would also shed some more light on Madeline's symptoms, because catalepsy can be a symptom of drug withdrawal. Opioid withdrawal in particular can cause seizures. So perhaps it is not epilepsy that Madeline is suffering with, perhaps it is withdrawal. Okay, so let's get away from the illness angle for now and talk a little bit more about what we know about the Usher family. If you are very into the classics, I think you could draw some links between the Usher twins and another set of very famous twins that appear in Western literature. That is Apollo and Artemis. In Greek mythology, Apollo and Artemis are twin deities. They are two of the Olympians. Unlike Madeline and Usher, in Greek mythology, Apollo and Artemis, I think, get along pretty well. But anyway, Apollo is the god of the sun, and he is also the god of music. He's associated particularly with stringed instruments, and he is also associated with poetry. Artemis is the goddess of the moon. So you got the sun and the moon, day and night there. They are a set. She's also associated with nature and with mountains, and she is one of the virgin goddesses, one of the unmarried, unmatched goddesses. So how can we link these to Usher and Madeline? So Apollo, god of the sun. There is light in Usher's room. However, it's very weak and it's distorted, and it comes through these reddish windows. And that kind of reflects Usher's state of mind. He distorts things, he twists things around into shapes that they are not meant to be. Also, he is very attached to music, and he can only tolerate the sound of stringed instruments. So again, there's the Apollo is the god of music, and he is very, very associated with stringed instruments in particular. Also, Apollo is the god of poetry, and Usher is a gifted poet. Then we have Madeline and Artemis. So Artemis is associated with mountains and with nature. And we do have Madeline, who is up in this house that is very isolated. It's up, tucked away in the mountains. Artemis is one of the virgin goddesses that shows that Madeline is not going to be branching out. She's not going to be starting her own family. And Artemis is the goddess of the moon. One of the last images that we have in this story is the moonlight breaking through the house as it splits apart. This could reflect Madeline's victory over her brother. He has buried her alive, but she comes back and she takes him down with her. So the last images we get of this moon that it says is blood red, whereas the last image of Madeline we get is in her white burial clothes that are now blood-stained because of her struggle. So she takes victory over her brother, and the moon, symbolizing the natural order of things, takes victory over the house. The house collapses and the natural light of the moon takes over. All right, that's about all I've got on setting and characters. Go ahead and meet me in part 3. In that video, we're going to continue the analysis and break down some key bits of text and some important scenes in this story. I hope you found something in this video that was helpful to you. If you did, please like and subscribe and turn on notifications so you know when the next story or poem becomes available. If you had a different story in mind or a particular author that you're interested in, definitely drop that in the comments and I will see what I can do. Best of luck to you, and I'll see you in the next chapter.